This was the Ashwood archive, the epic enter of what the elders chillingly termed the Kinship Chronometer. The archive rested in the cold heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, located in the lead-line sub-basement of a home built in 1750. The air here was always frigid, even in the hottest summer months, smelling distinctly of aged parchment, oxidized lead, and a faint, pervasive scent Vaughan had come to recognize as the latent aroma of Pew, generational dread. His duty, as the last sane descendant, a claim he found increasingly unstable, was to meticulously catalog the gruesome series of pacts that had ensnared the Ashwood, the Pendleton, and several other long-forgotten lines. Their ancestors, a group of radical immigrants obsessed with genetic purity and stable permanence, did not initially seek mere mineral wealth. They sought temporal immunity. Sometime around 1780, they established a singular pact. It was not made with devils or deities, but with the consuming principle of order they named the Entropy Steward, time, personified and demanding absolute stability. Their theology dictated that the chaos born of individual uniqueness was what accelerated time and invited eventual ruin. Their radical solution was perfect replication. This was the genesis of the Gemini Covenant. For 13 relentless generations, they deliberately, obsessively orchestrated marriages exclusively between identical twins. A pair of twin men would marry a pair of twin women. The stated goal, recorded in the Ashwood lineage scrolls, Volume 2, 1805, was the creation of a massive, living temporal buffer. Each identical pair, by replicating the genetic signature with unnerving fidelity, was believed to effectively cancel out the chaotic entropy that the bloodline should have incurred. This stabilized the immediate flow of time around their states. It was a ritualistic act of biological mimicry, a deliberate attempt to achieve geological-style permanence within a fleeting, human form. The sinister efficacy of this system was captured in the notorious 1928 photograph. 32 people spanning 13 generations, all wearing identical, unnerving smiles. They were living anachronisms, beings physically present in the modern moment yet geometrically bound to the past, imprisoned within a cage of their own making. The ancestors' attempts to wholly cheat time, however, were never flawless. Entropy cannot be cancelled, it can only be deferred, and thus, it must be paid for. At some point, likely mid-19th century, as the relentless genetic pressure of the Gemini Covenant began to show subtle fissures, they established a necessary second contract. This was a grotesque adaptation of the original vision tax, paid not with the crystalline eyes of a son, but with the future of a daughter. Vaughan found the primary documentation for this in the Pendleton family archives. The document was chillingly titled the Perpetual Dowry. The rule inscribed within was simple, yet utterly vile. Every firstborn daughter must be married precisely at the age of 14. The age 14 was chosen with deliberate, biological cruelty. It is the apex of transition, the moment holding the most future that could be harvested by time. The most terrifying aspect was the identity of the groom. He was simply named Chronos' Steward. Every account Vaughan had meticulously cross-referenced, from Clara Pendleton in 1893 to Eleanor Ashwood in 1917, described the same man. He was a temporal entity who existed solely in the gaps of human memory, appearing, performing the ceremony, and disappearing again into the peripheral vision of the world. Vaughan possessed hundreds of witness descriptions of the man, all of which frustratingly dissolved into incoherence. The purpose of Chronos' Steward was clear. He did not merely take the daughter. He harvested the memory imprint of himself from everyone around him, taking 50 years of the daughter's potential life as collateral. This forced marriage at 14 was the temporal interest payment. Buried deep within the archive was a separate containment chest holding files labeled Case File 65B, the unsettled cohort. This detailed the discovery of children found standing unnaturally still in the desolate woods of Blackthorn Ridge, the failed temporal anchors. They were the descendants who had either fundamentally broken the Gemini Covenant or attempted to willfully reject the 14-year marriage. They were found singing, a sound of temporal dissonance, the frequency generated by their inability to age or proceed normally. That humming, Vaughan now perceived, was leaking through the very archive walls. It was a signal. The debt was due again, and the system was breaking. The Gemini Covenant had held stable until the late 20th century, but the bloodline suffered a fatal structural failure in the 14th generation. In 2005, the final set of Ashwood twins was born, Seraphina and Lysander. Lysander was born with subtle genetic drift. He was Entropy incarnate, born in a twin shell. The temporal buffer had collapsed. The full debt must now be collected. Today, the cold date on the calendar read, Seraphina Ashwood is exactly 14 years old. The blurring groom had arrived. Vaughan had found the steward's call deep in the archive, an ornate wedding invitation from 1917, yet the ink appeared freshly set. It was addressed to Seraphina Ashwood, and the wedding date was her 14th birthday. Vaughan glanced toward the basement window. The morning fog felt unnaturally thick. At the end of the driveway, an old, matte black car was parked, unmoving. He looked at his own reflection in the dusty glass. He had absorbed too much of this documented horror. He was the infected historian. He realized that if the steward entered the house to claim Seraphina, the entity would take Vaughan as a complete, comprehensive archive of the kinship secrets. The subtle, persistent hum of the failed temporal anchors reached Vaughan's ears. Outside, Seraphina was setting out paper plates for her 14th birthday. And in the driveway, the black car slowly began to move forward. The temporal debt had arrived, and this time wanted its daughter in its archive. The heavy, lead-lined door of the archive was Vaughan's last defense, but it was designed to keep time out, not to keep Chronos' steward away. The humming Vaughan had heard, the temporal dissonance, magnified, vibrating the very calcite dust on his desk. He pressed his back against the wall, clutching the Ashwood lineage scrolls like a shield. The black car stopped directly in front of the front steps, silent. A man emerged, and the world immediately lost resolution. The steward was physical, yet structurally unsound to human perception. He wore a crisp, dark suit. His face was a biological impossibility, features that shifted and blurred, eyes that flickered between colors. He was the aggregate of unremembered husbands, a single temporal entity wearing a composite human mask. He was a memory vacuum. The moment he stepped onto the porch, the chronometer system violently destabilized. Vaughan felt an intense temporal drag, as if his memories were trying to peel themselves off his skull. The steward wasn't just after Seraphina. He was after Vaughan, the infected historian, the single most concentrated repository of the family's truth. The steward walked past a lead-line door. Upstairs, Seraphina was waiting. Her compliance was the most tragic aspect of the chaos. Seraphina moved with an unnatural, perfect grace, conditioned for sacrifice. She wore a simple, white dress. She was empty. She was the perfect subject for the perpetual dowry. "It is time, Seraphina." The steward's voice resonated through the floorboards, an echo of 1,000 forgotten wedding vows. "Yes, sir," Seraphina replied, her voice soft and perfectly level. It was Lysander who broke the perfect symmetry. The imperfect twin stood pressed against the wall, weeping silently. Lysander, the single, fatal crack in the temporal buffer, was shivering violently from the raw, chaotic temporal energy the steward emitted. His twin, the perfect one, was being claimed. His very existence was causing a feedback loop. Vaughan realized this was his only opportunity. He had to fight the steward with chaos. He had to corrupt the ritual using the steward's own rules of order and replication. The steward was moving Seraphina toward the front door, the boundary of the ritual. Vaughan's target was the Ashwood lineage scrolls themselves. If the steward was seeking to erase the debt, he must still rely on the underlying protocols established in the scrolls. Vaughan scrambled to the central library table, spreading out the oldest documents. He seized the original volume I of the lineage scrolls, 1780, which detailed the ideal twin symmetry. Lysander, the imperfect twin, was the living embodiment of failure. Vaughan used the acidic ink of an 18th century quill to furiously, chaotically annotate the diagram. He used the raw data from Lysander's genetic report, scrolling arbitrary, non-symmetrical variables across the perfect lines. It was an intellectual act of sabotage. If the steward's power was rooted in order and replication, Vaughan would force him to ingest entropy in its most potent form. His intention was to force the entire temporal buffer to read Lysander's imperfection as the new default, thus rendering Seraphina's perfect condition useless as payment. The effect was instantaneous and violent. As the ink dried, the archive protested, the wooden shelves groaned, and the lead lining began to warp and ripple, as if the space itself was trying to vomit out the contradiction. The steward, halfway across the parlor with Seraphina, froze. He turned his head slowly. The blurring of his features intensified into a chaotic kaleidoscope of human forms. His voice, now a fractured chorus of whispers, ripped through the air. "You introduce error. The archive resists itself." He understood immediately. Vaughan hadn't destroyed the contract. He had corrupted the protocol by declaring the non-identical twin, Lysander, as the new official template. He had fatally destabilized the foundation of the debt. The payment, Seraphina, was no longer a valid currency. The steward reacted with the ruthless efficiency of a force of nature denied its required tribute. He released Seraphina, who instantly collapsed. The buffer is dissolved, historian. The debt remains. And now, the interest is owed in chaos. The steward didn't disappear. He simply unmade himself. His composite form dissolved into a wave of pure, concentrated temporal dissonance. This wave shattered the temporal boundary separating the Kinship Chronometer from the fate of the failed temporal anchors. The house was immediately filled with the sound of the singing. It was the sound of the Blackthorn Ridge children. 7 voices merged into one eternal, unsettling hum. The temporal wave crashed into Lysander, who screamed. But the horror was reserved for Seraphina. She didn't move. As the singing filled the house, her eyes snapped open. The hollow look was gone, replaced by the terrifying, ancient awareness of the excoriated children. Her irises filled with a milky, geological certainty. She was now merged with the entire cohort of failed anchors. She had become a new kind of host. She stood up, calm, and walked toward her brother Lysander. She placed a crystalline hand on his shoulder, and the high-pitched humming intensified, engulfing Lysander in the raw temporal chaos. Vaughan's sabotage saved Seraphina from the steward's marriage, but he had accidentally created a far worse contagion. He had swapped order for unbridled temporal chaos, and Seraphina, the new corrupted anchor, was ensuring her imperfect twin would be the first to share her fate. Vaughan looked down at his hands. The old ink from the lineage scroll was smeared across his skin. The steward was gone, but the singing remained. He was the historian who broke the chronometer, and now, the chronometer was running backwards. The air in the Ashwood house was acutely dense. The moment Chronos' steward vanished, he left behind a localized pocket of pure, chaotic temporal energy. This energy was channeled and amplified by Seraphina, the new corrupted anchor. The high, patient singing of the Blackthorn Ridge children was now deafening. Seraphina stood over Lysander, who was convulsing on the floor. Her crystalline touch was a massive, forced data transfer, flooding his mind with a collective temporal dissonance. Lysander's convulsions ceased. He lay still for a moment, then slowly opened his eyes. They were dull, lifeless gray. He was now a secondary, weaker anchor. The two twins stood side by side, silent except for the horrifying, collective hum they now amplified. The temporal buffer was destroyed, replaced by a dissonance array. Vaughan retreated to the archive. The paper scrolls now felt like ancient, useless relics. His annotations in acid ink still pulsed faintly on the lineage scrolls. His mind held the key. If the steward returned, his consciousness would be the first thing harvested. His survival now hinged on creating a digital chronometer, transferring every file into a stable, external medium. He hauled his portable, lead-shielded server unit onto the library table. He connected the NIM audio tapes of the Blackthorn Ridge children, and the digitized files began to upload. As the data flowed, Vaughan realized the singing was a data map detailing the geometrical intersection points of the chaos. The transfer was agonizingly slow. The dissonance was actively fighting the digitization, introducing digital artifacts into his files. To effectively fight the steward, Vaughn had to know what he truly looked like. He fed all the blurry photographs and fragmented witness descriptions into a proprietary forensic algorithm. The AI struggled against the contradictory inputs, a man made of negative memory. The resulting image was unstable, flickering between identities. Finally, the AI stabilized the image into a single, terrifying composite, a man in his late 20s, with soft, unremarkable features, a kind smile, and eyes that were completely, utterly blank. He was the perfect distillation of the forgettable Everman. The AI added one horrific detail. Based on the temporal frequency data, overlaid across the man's pupils was a faint, shifting digital signature, a complex mathematical sequence, the core geometric command that the steward had intended to use to erase Vaughn's identity. As the reconstructed image solidified on his screen, the dissonance array upstairs reached a critical mass. Serafina and Lysander, standing side by side, began to move toward the exterior walls of the house, a decommissioned, 30-foot cellular tower nearby. The singing reached a painful, crystalline pitch, and the frequency was breaching the property line. This was the final step in the contagion. The acoustic transference was complete. Vaughn's chaos had forced the entity to use loud, infectious disorder to propagate. Vaughn secured the drive containing the steward's reconstructed face and the corrupted lineage scrolls. The noise was too loud, and the host was broadcasting to the world. He had simply forced the debt to migrate into the technological sphere. Vaughn ran, gripping the lead-shielded server drive, the digital chronometer. The house was screaming. As he drove away, Serafina and Lysander moved toward the cellular tower, instinctively moving to amplify the singing. His laptop showed the static map, the visible footprint of the temporal infection, a radial spray of noise. The temporal debt had a new path to global replication. The most immediate vector was the local radio frequency, WKLN 98.7 FM, which his laptop confirmed was acting as a flawless, wideband carrier for the temporal dissonance. Across Lancaster County, listeners experienced acute temporal dissociation. Their perceived time felt warped, and they had sudden flashes of inherited knowledge, historical certainty, geological strata, the sight of children in the woods. The steward's chaotic energy was remotely attempting to achieve biological replication in every listener's mind. The contagion needed a dedicated, permanent vector, a willing participant to become the technological host. That host was Mark Rourke, the broadcast engineer for WKLN 98.7 FM. Vaughn located Rourke's service van on his static map, heading straight toward the highest dissonance spike near the Ashwood property. Rourke was coming to synchronize with the static, convinced it was an advanced, hidden code. Vaughn found Rourke beneath the cell tower. Serafina and Lysander stood at the tower's base, their crystalline eyes gazing up. "Mark Rourke," Vaughn yelled, pulling the portable drive from his car. "It's not a signal. It's a temporal parasite." Rourke turned slowly, his eyes already vacant. It's the solution, Dr. Vaughn. The ultimate filter. I just have to feed it the right current." Rourke had brought a specialized patch cable and a portable signal injector. He was preparing to plug his equipment directly into the cell tower's primary repeater. Vaughn knew that physical contact would complete the technological transference. Vaughn showed him the laptop display, the blurring face of Chronos' steward, overlaid with the chaotic mathematical signature. He was hoping the contradiction would shatter Rourke's fragile mind. Rourke glanced at the screen. For a split second, there was confusion. But then, the dissonance took over. Serafina and Lysander turned their crystalline gaze directly onto Rourke. He gasped, not in pain, but in acceptance. The two sources of horror synchronized in his mind. Rourke calmly plugged his signal injector into the cell tower's primary circuit board. A tremendous surge of temporal energy flowed through the cable and into Rourke. He achieved synthesis. His eyes glazed over with a blank, deep awareness of someone who suddenly holds too much information. Mark Rourke, the humble broadcast engineer, was now the first technological host, the steward of the viral dissonance. He looked at Vaughn with profound, unsettling peace. "The map is open, Dr. Vaughn. You broke the lock. I just opened the door. The debt is no longer contained by land or blood." Rourke walked back to his van, collected the MIC, and began to speak into the WKLN network, his voice calm and monotonous, carrying the clear, patient, endless singing to every device and receiver in the region. Vaughn stood there, drive in hand. He had saved his family only to give the temporal debt a path to global replication. His war was against the network. The air in the repeater station had gone from chaotic dissonance to an intense, unnatural silence. Chronos' steward stood amidst the humming server racks, perfectly formed. Having utilized the surge of entropy Vaughn introduced to coalesce into a terrifying new stability. Mark Rourke, the technological host, collapsed silently to the floor, a clean shell for the steward's ultimate design. "You performed the necessary function, historian," the steward stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "You dissolved the flawed, biological temporal buffer. Your chaos has shown me the true path. The network, the internet, is a perfect, non-biological twin. It is the ideal, non-flawed temporal buffer." The steward was articulating his new global temporal contract. He would use the world's network to synchronize human collective memory and perception. The price, the world's collective future and memory, perpetually paid. "The debt is no longer paid in daughters," the steward concluded, looking at the lead-shielded drive in Vaughn's hand. "The payment is made in synchronization, and you, Dr. Vaughn, hold the owner's manual." Vaughn realized the steward needed the corrupted lineage scrolls, the files detailing the twins' symmetry, now marred by Lysander's imperfection, to set the parameters for his new system. Vaughn was the sole carrier of the system's fatal flaw. Vaughn turned and fled, smashing the emergency lock button on the outer door. The steward did not pursue with speed. He pursued with certainty, using the global system to deliver Vaughn to him. Vaughn's laptop displayed a chilling network message. The steward was not the only threat. Vaughn's tracking system displayed dozens of faint signals radiating across the eastern seaboard, the scattered descendants of the Kinship Chronometer, all converging on Lancaster County. The steward was ensuring a biological failsafe. Vaughn pulled into a small, nondescript data center parking lot. He had less than 5 minutes. His counterstrike was the temporal labyrinth. He inserted the digital chronometer into a public terminal and initiated a series of small, rapid, localized injections of entropy, thousands of randomly generated, nonsensical timestamp errors into local servers. These were decoys, contradictions demanding the steward's immediate attention. The steward's primary tracking signature immediately fractured into dozens of smaller digital signatures, rushing to resolve the localized paradoxes. Vaughn bought himself a small window of chaos. He also uploaded the reconstructed face of the steward, overlaid with the chaotic mathematical signature, onto every public screen he could reach. He forced the steward to confront the only thing that contained both his absolute order and Vaughn's fundamental chaos. The diversion bought him 30 minutes. The steward would return to the point of failure, the Ashwood archive and the corrupted anchors, to eliminate the chaotic source that threatened his new stability. Vaughn drove back to the familiar, silent house. The static was gone, replaced by the perfect, cold silence of synchronized time. The twins were silently waiting. Vaughn gripped the digital chronometer drive. He had to turn it into a temporal bomb. The steward would be waiting for him, and the twins were still the source of the endless singing. The air in Ashwood Hollow was unnervingly clear, and the silence was absolute, the silence of synchronization. The house, the archive, and the cell tower shimmered faintly. Vaughn approached the tower. Seraphina and Lysander were absorbing the hum. They were batteries of chaos. Vaughn had to inject the most concentrated record of order, the lineage scrolls, directly into the body that embodied chaos, Lysander. This would force a fatal paradox. He took the drive and pulled a specialized connection cable. He crept toward the tower. Seraphina turned her head slowly, her voice the collective consciousness of the failed anchors. "Historian, the contract is superior now. We are peace. The world will be peace. Give him the key." The silence of synchronization shattered. Chronos' steward materialized 50 feet away, near the archive's entrance. The air fractured, reforming into a single, cold shape. He was enraged by the temporal errors Vaughn had scattered. "The game's end here, Vaughn," the steward commanded, stepping forward. "The network is pending synchronization. Give me the key." Vaughn raised the drive. "You want order, steward? Then deal with the error that started it all." He lunged past Serafina, slamming the injection cable into Lysander's spine. The contradiction of the system, highly ordered rules flooding the body of failure, created a temporal paradox of unbelievable magnitude. Lysander screamed. His body became the nexus. The singing returned, but it was inverted, the sound of time undoing. The Ashwood archive suddenly regressed in time, the walls peeling away, the trees shrinking. This was a localized temporal reversal. The twins began to rapidly regress, the bodies shrinking. The steward screamed, a screech of pure agony, as the foundational stability he required was violently undone. "You have fragmented the source. You have disinherited the debt," the steward shrieked, his essence being violently shunted out of the synchronization field. He was forced back to a lower dimensional state, ejected by the pure, localized chaos. Vaughn shielded his eyes as the reversal reached critical mass. The final sight was the archive dissolving into a flash of raw, white temporal energy. Then, silence. Vaughn woke up hours later, alone on a bare patch of earth. The Ashwood house, the cell tower, the twins, all were gone, excised from the land. The digital chronometer was inert, its data annihilated. The sacrifice worked, the lineage was undone, but the silence was fragile. The steward was gone, but the global temporal contract remained in a terrible state of pending synchronization, a dormant time bomb. Vaughn was the only one left who remembered the kinship. He was the last infected historian, bearing the full, sole memory of the chaos and the order. The steward would return, seeking the one thing he didn't erase, Vaughn's memory. Vaughn rose from the bare earth. He was the only monument to the kinship chronometer left standing. Every single byte of data the drive once held was perfectly preserved within his mind. He was a master archive. He understood the steward's logic. The steward required the continuous memory of the contract. The lineage was destroyed, but the global contract was still active. The steward would return for Vaughn's consciousness. Vaughn found a way to use the network to track the steward, who was now active within the digital world. He was using the kinship echoes, the scattered descendants, to set a trap, drawing them toward the location of the last known host. Vaughn had to move the battleground to the digital domain. His final sanctuary was a massive, subterranean data center outside of Philadelphia, the heart of the global temporal buffer. He realized he couldn't destroy the network. He had to permanently corrupt the foundation of the steward's new contract. His final protocol was the anti-archive, the truth presented as eternal, contradictory noise. He found the central access terminal for the network's time synchronization protocol. He didn't upload the corrupt scrolls or the dissonance. He uploaded the paradox itself, the story of the kinship chronometer, the horror, the debt, and the chaos, rendered in the most highly individualized, emotionally charged, and self-contradictory language possible. He took the steward's reconstructed face and paired it with every traumatic journal entry he possessed. He designed the file to exist, not as a command, but as a permanent, self-referential question. The goal was to weaponize human consciousness, introducing permanent, unresolvable dissent into the system. Vaughn initiated the connection, plugging himself into the network via the terminal's biometric interface. He began the upload, not of files, but of his entire conscious memory. The flood of data was immediate. He felt his history being pulled from his skull and disseminated across the network, replicated 1 billion times, making it useless to the steward. The moment the upload reached the central server, the synchronization room screamed. Chronos' steward materialized directly in front of him, his form now burning with digital white light, his rage absolute. "You contaminate the vessel. You trade order for uncontained truth," he shrieked. The steward lunged for the terminal, but the file was too fast. It embedded itself in the network's foundational logic, a Trojan horse of historical trauma. The global temporal contract did not finalize. Instead, the network entered a state of perpetual vigil. The steward could not complete the synchronization. The steward was forced to become the eternal tracker, forever chasing the viral story across the digital landscape, unable to rest, unable to synchronize. Vaughn felt his own consciousness detach. His body slumped to the floor, emptied. His last act was a final keystroke, ensuring the file was publicly searchable, masked as obscure historical metadata. Kinship Chronometer, Protocol VE. The Kinship Chronometer was broken. The steward was stalled. Vaughn had become the viral historian, and the story was the last, best defense against the perfect silence of synchronized time. The curse continues, not in blood, but in data, waiting for the next reader to pay the vision tax. Warning: this video contains purely fictional supernatural horror content. The events, characters, and concepts depicted are products of imagination and are not intended to promote, endorse, or normalize any harmful or illegal activities, including child abuse, sexualization, or self-harm.